As Douglas Carswell MP said recently, Greece might be the first Western country to discover that you cannot keep running up debts to pay for a lifestyle you did not earn. She will not be the last. The laws of mathematics are universal. In Britain, interest rates on government borrowing now stand at record lows. If we're not at rock bottom, then we're incredibly close. That means the most important trend of the next 20 years is almost certainly rising interest rates. Debt has been getting cheaper for 30 years. Now, it's about to start getting much more expensive. We're now facing an unprecedented crisis. As interest rates rise, our record debts will become impossible to bear. No one can say how quickly things will escalate. Interest rates could rise overnight, or they could slowly and inevitably push higher, taking years to slowly strangle the economy, the housing market, the stock market, stripping us all of our wealth one day at a time. What we can say with certainty is that sooner or later interest rates will rise. We're approaching the day when foreign investors realise the scale of our problems and demand higher interest rates, or stop lending to us altogether. When that day arrives, we are certain things will get nasty. So what happens to Britain when interest rates rise? What shape will the crisis take? And what does all this mean for you and your family? The first flashpoint will be the banking system. We've already seen this across Europe. This is because banks hold huge amounts of government debt. When interest rates rise, the value of government debt, bonds, falls. Even a small jump in interest rates would wipe billions of capital off banks' balance sheets. It's impossible to say exactly which high street banks, if any, could withstand that kind of hit. As news of the bank's problems hits the press and rumours of a new round of bailout spread, the public will catch on to what's happening. We're likely to see a run on the banks. Picture the scenes we saw at Northern Rock as people rushed to get their savings back, but 10 times worse. That's because this time round, the government simply won't have the money to bail the banks out again. But the crisis will not be confined to the financial sector. The next domino to fall will be the housing market. Most mortgages are linked to interest rates. As interest rates shoot upwards, millions of people will be pushed underwater by a combination of falling housing values and rising mortgage payments. But that isn't all. When a financial system ceases to function, the social fabric begins to fray. We're not simply talking about shares falling or house prices dropping, which is devastating enough. We're talking about the breakdown of social order. The important thing to realise is that Britain is going to change very significantly. Things might never be the same again. Is all this too alarming? Some of our critics would say so. Most people think Britain's debt collapse can't happen. Of course, it's hard to picture. Banks look safe until they announce they're broke. Governments say everything's under control until they beg for bailouts. These events often come as a shock to the public. Many people assume they'll never happen, but assumptions can be misleading, especially ones that are widely held. The Victorians thought the British Empire would last forever. Americans in the 1920s thought the stock market boom would never end. And here in the UK, during the 1990s and early 2000s, we thought we could keep borrowing and spending forever. But if you need any convincing of how quickly things can change, of how rapidly order can turn into chaos, history offers us a number of painful reminders. Let's take just one of them. In the early 20th century, Argentina was one of the world's largest economies. Rich in natural resources, a massive industrial sector, so cultured they called Buenos Aires the Paris of South America. In fact, a popular saying 100 years ago was, as rich as an Argentine. But fast forward to the end of the 20th century, and things looked very different. Argentina's borrowing spiraled out of control. As Argentina's debt accumulated in the late 90s, its financial system buckled. Austerity measures were put in place. Sound familiar? Businesses closed, trade fell off a cliff, and investment fled the country by the billion. Come early 2001, the country was in a state of siege, with banks blocking cash withdrawals, rioting in the streets, and the total collapse of government. So desperate were villagers for food, they hijacked livestock trucks and slaughtered the animals in the streets. To give you some idea of how bad things got and how quickly they escalated, you need to listen to our man in Argentina, Federico Tesore. Federico is one of our private network of analysts. He worked as a financial advisor for Citibank in Buenos Aires at the time, experiencing the chaos firsthand. He's got quite a story to tell.
It was 2001. The US had just suffered the 9/11 attacks. Many Argentines were frightened about what could happen in America. It was chaos. So they decided to bring back their money to Argentina. But that was a terrible mistake, because in December of 2001, the Argentinian government created the corralito. In English, you will say playpen, I think. We call it a money prison. This meant that you could only get out $500 per week in cash from your bank account. It didn't matter if you had $1 million in the bank. In cash, you could only get $500 per week. For 2 months, this madness continued, until the government decided to convert the US dollar deposit into Argentinian pesos. The official exchange rate was 1.4 to 1, but the illegal market exchange rate was 3 to 1. Even worse, this conversion was not in cash. The government created a 10-year bond for depositors. So people that had $100,000 deposit in the bank were given an Argentinian pesos 140,000 10 years bond. This, of course, enraged people who stormed into the banks very angry. I was working at the Citibank bank at the time. I saw what was happening from the inside. More than once, my life was threatened by desperate customers who just wanted to get their money back. I had to talk with thousands of people per day, many old people, and try to explain what was happening. It was almost impossible. One of the hardest parts was to explain why the international bank like Citibank decided not to recognize the dollar deposit to their customer. They had the money brought to do that, but they didn't do it. They basically defrauded their own customer. The depositor attacked the bank, rioting outside, smashing the windows. All the walls were painted with insults and complaints. We had to enter the bank escorted by the police. It was like living in hell.
It's a chilling story. Within 3 or 4 years, the country fell into financial and social anarchy. And what happened next? Well, Argentina wasn't crossed off the map, it still exists. But 12 years on, it's barely recovered. Conditions for many honest, hard-working people are simply terrible. They're still trying to understand what happened to their tattered country. The government has raided public pensions, the stock market is depressed, and the global market steers well clear of Argentine bonds. It's not complicated. Once your country has imploded and trust in systems and institutions has evaporated, investment stays away for decades. Regular Argentines now hoard gold. Endless government scams and corruption have made them suspicious and distrustful. And a culture of short-termism pervades. But that's Argentina, right? A crazy South American country full of impulsive hotheads and corrupt politicians. That could